A depressed loner named Lee Chandler lives alone in Quincy, Massachusetts, and works as a janitor and handyman in rental buildings. While working, he maintains a cold but professional demeanor, but never gets friendly with tenants.
The water's gonna drip through to the bowl. I could bring you a new one tomorrow.
I could really slit my throat, but oh well. The little girls are charming.
Can I give you a tip?
You mean like a suggestion?
No, I mean like a tip.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
However, one day, a rude tenant calls Lee to fix her shower and gets into an argument with him, in which he tells her off. The woman then throws him out of her apartment and reports the incident to his manager, Mr. Emery.
Did you hear me? I said get out!
I can't. You're blocking the doorway.
Mr. Emery calls Lee in to discuss the complaint and to ask him to apologize to the angry woman. However, seeing that Lee feels justified in his actions and realizing that he's too valuable to lose, he decides to assuage the angry tenant and fix the problem himself.
You do good work. You're dependable. But I get these complaints all the time.
Later that night, Lee goes to the local bar to have some beers by himself and picks a fight with a couple of men who keep staring at him from a distance.
No, don't apologize. Seriously.
After the fight, Lee goes to his small apartment and falls asleep in front of his TV, mentally preparing to repeat the same routine again the next day. Keeping to yourself can be peaceful, but something in Lee's eye says that nothing is at peace inside. A few weeks later while at work, Lee is informed that his brother Joe has suffered a heart attack and has been rushed to the hospital. Worried to his core, Lee makes the necessary arrangements at work and starts the 2-hour drive to Manchester by the Sea, where Joe lives with his 16-year-old son, Patrick.
I'll be up there in an hour and a half.
Unfortunately, when Lee gets to the hospital, he is informed that Joe had passed away an hour earlier.
He just, I don't know, he just like fell over. I thought he was kidding me at first.
It's alarming that nothing much changes in Lee's expression, and the same pain he always carries in his eyes shines through here. Has Lee always been in pain? As Lee tries to process his brother's death, Joe's best friend George shares that he rushed Joe to the hospital after he passed out unexpectedly. He then offers to inform the sad news to Lee's uncle Donnie, who had recently relocated to Minnesota, and Lee's ex-wife Randy. Leaving these tasks to George, Lee goes to the morgue to see his brother for the last time. On his way there, Lee thinks of the time when Joe had first been diagnosed with congestive heart failure. The doctor had explained the nature of the disease to the Chandler brothers, their father, and Joe's ex-wife Elise, who had since become a full-blown alcoholic and abandoned Joe and Patrick. Elise had suddenly freaked out, thrown a temper tantrum, and left the hospital, to everyone's annoyance.
You must calm down.
Sorry, I'm really not.
No, don't.
No more. I'm not gonna. Nope.
Elise?
In the present day, Lee reaches the morgue, sees Joe, and quietly bids him a farewell before returning to join George. Then, Lee insists on personally informing his nephew of the sad news and leaves to go to Patrick's school. On the drive to the school, Lee remembers the time he went fishing with Joe and Patrick on Joe's boat about 10 years ago. While Joe drives the boat, Lee and young Patrick have fun, tease each other, fish, and catch a big fish. Patrick becomes excited by this feat, and the trio celebrates immensely.
It's gotta be a great
It's
wife.
gotta be a great white fatty, maybe a barracuda, who knows, man?
Later that day, Lee returns to his suburban home and checks on his wife Randy, who is in bed with the flu. He then goes around lovingly embracing his 2 young daughters and newborn son before heading to the shower.
Oh, go, come on, I'm sick.
In the present day, after driving for a few minutes, Lee calls the school's vice president, Paul, who informs him that Patrick has left for hockey practice and gives him the location of the training ground. After hanging up the call, Paul shares the situation with the secretary, and the duo muse over the fact that Lee has returned to the city.
Joe Chandler's in the hospital again.
Oh, how awful.
Yeah.
Who was on the phone?
That was Lee Chandler.
At the hockey training ground in Gloucester, Patrick, who has become a very important part of the hockey team, violently attacks 2 of his friends on the opposing team during a game and is scolded by his coach for his aggressive behavior. Despite the serious warning, Patrick continues to disrespect the coach and gets benched.
Knock it off! One more time and you're out. You understand that, Chandler? One more time.
Then, instead of apologizing to the coach, Patrick spots Lee from afar and skates towards him. The coach becomes fascinated by seeing the infamous Lee Chandler and barely hears the boys when they tell him that none of the stories about Lee are true.
All right, mind your own business for a little while, huh? Take a break. Get a water.
Then Lee gently tells the sad news to the coach and Patrick, who shares it with his close friends before leaving the practice with Lee. On their drive, Lee offers to drive Patrick to the hospital so that he can see his father, and the duo gets into a minor argument as a result of a misunderstanding.
No, you said let's just go, and then you get out of the car.
Okay, I
without
meant let's
telling
just
me
go
what the
inside. Let's
matter
just go
with
look
you?
at what's your problem?
The duo then quickly calms down, apologizes to one another, and heads to the hospital. There, in hope of supporting him, Lee accompanies the teenager to the morgue. However, Patrick only manages to stay a few seconds and immediately leaves. The duo then drives to Joe's home, and as soon as they enter, Patrick asks Lee's permission to invite his friends over and is relieved when Lee agrees. While Lee dines alone and hangs out by himself, Patrick, his girlfriend Sylvie, and his two friends hang out together talking about their favorite memories of Joe.
He was gentle too, you know? Like his son.
That evening, Patrick approaches Lee once again and asks him for permission so that Sylvie can spend the night. Grateful that he has Lee's approval, Patrick then discusses with his uncle whether he should reach out to his mom to inform her of the news. But after some discussion, the duo decides against it.
Nobody even knows where she is.
Yeah. No, I was just curious what you thought.
Later, Lee spends time remembering how drunk and irresponsible Elise used to get, while Lee discreetly reaches out to his mother and informs her of the situation via email. The next day in school, the coach calls Patrick to his office to tell him that he understands the incredibly difficult time he's going through and promises to look past all his violent behavior. However, the coach adds that he wants Patrick to take a couple of days off as he doesn't want him to hurt himself on the ice.
If you want to come in and talk, want somebody to spill your guts to, the door's open.
Later, after school, Lee picks Patrick up and takes him to see Joe's lawyer so that the will can be read. However, there, Lee gets the shock of his life when he hears that Joe had appointed him to be Patrick's legal guardian without even talking to him. Lee, who had expected Uncle Donnie to be the guardian, tries to discuss his way out of the responsibility with the lawyer to no avail. Then, Lee tries to use his remote location and his job as a reason to turn down the unexpected appointment, but is once again shocked to learn that his brother had thought of everything, wanting him to move back to Manchester, and left him a hefty amount of money to cover his moving expense, along with some to cover the daily cost of living for both his son and Lee, until they settle into their new life and Lee figures out his new source of income.
I think the idea was that you would relocate.
Relocate to where?
It kind of seems like, despite having a great relationship with his nephew, Lee doesn't trust himself for such a parenting role in general. Despite the lawyer's detailed and sensible explanation of all of Lee's questions about the will and the way it's supposed to work out, Lee fails to understand his brother's state of mind and reasoning for making such a decision. This panic then brings out Lee's most painful memory of the events that changed his life forever and made him the lifeless shadow of his younger self. A few years earlier, one night in Manchester, while Randy and the kids slept, Lee invited a few of his friends over and had a small party where the men enjoyed themselves drinking beer, smoking, and playing games. However, as the night grows, the party gets out of control and wakes Randy, who furiously scolds Lee and orders him to throw everyone out.
Can I get these fucking pinheads out of my house, please?
Yeah, I do.
Lee agrees with the order, but as soon as Randy leaves, the drunk men continue making a ruckus, forcing her to return and give them a final warning.
It's 2 o'clock in the fucking morning. Get these assholes dressed and get in the fuck out of here.
The men then apologize to Randy and finally leave, while Lee advises them to drive carefully as they are all drunk and high out of their minds. In the present, seeing that Lee is having flashbacks of that fateful night, the lawyer tries to get him to snap out of it and engages him in conversation. He then explains to Lee that he has the right to refuse the guardianship, but stresses that that would mean that Patrick might have to be stuck with Elise, whom no one really trusts.
Forget it.
Don't
Forget it. Like you know, everybody should be just like you.
As Lee tries to figure out his options, his mind once again involuntarily drifts back to the memory of the fateful day and forces him to relive the horror. A few years earlier, the night of the party after the men leave, Lee goes around the house checking on everyone and is relieved to see that Randy has gone back to bed and the kids are all sound asleep upstairs despite the ruckus. However, Lee notices that it's freezing upstairs and throws on a few logs in the fireplace and makes a fire, hoping to warm up the place for his kids, as he can't use the central heat, which worsens Randy's sinusitis. Then, still hyper, Lee decides to burn his energy off and walks to the local store to buy a few things. On his way, Lee remembers that he had forgotten to put the screen on the fireplace, but figures it will all be okay as he will be back in just a few minutes. However, when he returns, he's confused to see his house swarmed by the neighbors and first responders, and it takes him a moment to realize that his worst nightmare has materialized, and his house has burned to the ground, while his family still slept inside. It's terrifying how life can totally change in the blink of an eye, from partying to burying all of his family in just a few minutes. Luckily, the first responders managed to reach Randy, who was sleeping in the downstairs master bedroom, and pull her out in time as she screamed at the top of her lungs in utter horror and grief for her children. Lee becomes paralyzed in sheer panic and grief and just stands by as the first responders run around trying to get the fire under control. By morning, once the fire is extinguished, Randy is taken to the hospital to be treated for smoke inhalation by the ambulance. Meanwhile, Joe is notified of the incident and rushes over to the house to support his brother. After much searching, the first responders finally locate the bodies of the 3 young children and bring them out in body bags, which tears Lee apart. Losing a child as hard as it is, but losing 3, and due to something he feels responsible for, it's a wonder how Lee survived the ordeal. Then, accompanied by his father and Joe, Lee is taken to the police station to give a statement and gives a detailed and emotional recount of everything that happened. After carefully listening to everything, the police rule the matter a tragic accident, and to Lee's surprise, they decide to let him go.
Look, Lee, you made a horrible mistake, like a million other people did last night.
Overridden with guilt and grief, Lee then unexpectedly snatches a gun from an officer and tries to kill himself. Luckily, everyone around reacts quickly and rescues him. At present, Lee snaps out of the painful memory and walks out of the lawyer's office with Patrick. As the duo heads to the car, they get into an argument over Joe's boat, which is left to Patrick, as Lee intends to sell it to save on maintenance costs, while the teenager wants to keep it.
Why not? It's my boat now, isn't it? You can't take it out alone.
During the argument, a passerby tries to intervene and help Patrick, but is soon scolded by Lee, who proceeds to start a fight. Patrick calms down his uncle and quickly apologizes to the man.
Great parenting. What? What'd you say? I said great parenting. You mind your business, asshole.
Then the duo drives to the port to speak to George about the boat. As George tells them how expensive it is to replace the motor, Lee causes more controversy as he announces his plan to take Patrick and move to Boston once the funeral is over. And Patrick loses his mind in anger as he wants to stay with his friends.
Well,
he doesn't want to be my guardian, for Christ's sake.
We're trying to lose some kids at this point.
As the conversation goes on, Patrick senses that his uncle is not exactly thrilled to be his guardian and stoically accepts it. Then, as the duo leaves the boat, Patrick mentions that he's found out the whereabouts of his mother, which infuriates his uncle, as he knows Joe's reservations towards her.
She emailed me last year, so I emailed her back. You know email?
Then, the duo drives to the funeral parlor in Beverly and learns that the funeral has to be postponed to spring as the ground is frozen. After learning that his father's body will be kept in the freezer until then, Patrick panics and challenges Lee's decisions on the funeral arrangements. And the duo once again gets into an argument.
Ground is too hard. They'll bury him in the spring.
So what do they do with him until then?
Put him in a freezer.
Then the duo gets into the car and fights about the freezing temperature.
You shut the up about the freezer. You want me to have a nervous breakdown because his undertaker's in a funeral? Who cares?
No, I don't.
It seems like the grieving men are taking out their grief on each other and trying to focus their energy on anything else other than the great loss they have experienced. Then Lee drives Patrick to his second girlfriend, Sandy's house for band practice. After the practice, Patrick spends a few hours there with Sandy and has dinner with her and her mother. Later that night, Randy calls Lee at the house to offer her condolences and ask him for permission to attend Joe's service with her new husband, Josh. Lee calmly gives her permission, and the two catch up for a bit until Randy shares that she's pregnant. This news catches Lee off guard, but he controls his emotions and congratulates his ex-wife.
Actually, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just gotta go.
Okay.
I'm slightly late.
I just make sure it's okay if me and Josh come to the funeral.
It's totally okay.
A few days later, despite the delayed burial, the Chandlers and George hold a funeral service for Joe, which is attended by all their loved ones and acquaintances. Lee suppresses his emotions and grief and goes through the motions of the service as stoically as he can muster, while George and his wife organize everything. Patrick spends it surrounded by friends who show their genuine support. In the evening, Lee refuses to let Sylvie stay the night at the house, which annoys Patrick. Then, a fight breaks out once again over the Boston move, which Patrick passionately resists.
You're a janitor in Quincy. What the hell do you care where you live?
During the night, while Lee stays up reading, he hears a commotion, rushes to the kitchen, and finds Patrick having a panic attack.
Patrick.
No.
Hey, do you want me to take you to the hospital?
I don't know.
It seems the loss has finally caught up to Patrick, who has done everything he can to occupy and protect himself from feeling it. Then, after a few moments, Patrick slightly calms down, flees to his room, and locks himself in. Worried for his nephew's safety, Lee busts the door down, and after making sure the teenager is okay, quietly sits there and watches until Patrick falls asleep.
I just don't like it being in the freezer.
You've expressed that very clearly. I don't like it either.
The next morning, after thinking about Patrick all night, Lee decides to stay in Manchester with his nephew until the boy finishes the school year, so that he can have time to adjust to his new life. He shares his decision with Patrick and promises to let him return for a visit anytime he wants. Patrick is not impressed with the compromise and nonchalantly accepts.
You going to Godspell?
The next day, Elise calls the house hoping to talk to her son, but Lee hangs up on her. Later, Patrick lashes out at Lee, accusing him of trying to keep him from his mom and ruining his life. Unfazed by all the accusations, Lee refuses Patrick's suggestion to live with his mother and informs him that he will only allow him to have lunch with her and her fiancé once he talks to her and makes sure she's sober.
She's not an alcoholic anymore and she wants me to stay with her, then that solves all our problems. I can take the same bus to my same school.
In the next few days, Lee goes around the city looking for jobs, but fails to find one, as many of the local community had concluded that the fire was not an accident and have since dubbed Lee a murderer. A few days later, Patrick asks Lee to take him to Sandy's house and begs him to occupy Jill for a few minutes so that he can get some alone time with Sandy without any intrusions. After a lengthy back and forth, Lee reluctantly accepts the request.
This could be good for both of us.
Lee joins the delighted Jill, who has a crush on him, for a drink in the living room. But the plan goes awry as Lee continues his quiet demeanor and the interaction becomes strained and awkward. Soon, Jill notices this and complains to her daughter, which forces the men to leave. In the ride back, Patrick scolds Lee for his inability to make meaningful conversation with his peers.
You were a tremendous help.
I didn't ask to sit down.
You can't make small talk like every other grown-up in the world?
The next day, Lee drives Patrick to Elisa's house for lunch, meets her and her husband Jeffrey, and leaves after warning the teenager to text him if anything goes wrong. A few minutes later, the trio sits for lunch together, but to Patrick's disappointment, it turns out to be very awkward.
I think your mother wants you to feel
No,
that...
I'm just saying that this is your home too.
Later, in the car ride back, Lee makes an observation that Elise has transformed in a good way as she's sober. But Patrick takes it the wrong way and accuses his uncle of trying to get rid of him.
Wow.
Well, what?
You'll do anything to get rid of me.
To make matters worse, Patrick receives a bizarre email from Jeffrey, who asks him to communicate with his mother through him and is heartbroken.
Did you call that girl Sandy's? See if she'll come over.
No thanks. Nice try, though.
A few days later, hoping to help his nephew with his dreams of repairing the boat and keeping his father's legacy, Lee sells some of Joe's valuable rifle collection and buys a new motor for the boat, which delights Patrick to no end. Patrick then takes Sandy on a boat ride and enjoys some quality time with her. Meanwhile, Lee walks around the town doing some chores and unexpectedly runs into Randy with her newborn.
Hey, Dylan. Very handsome.
After greeting each other, Randy asks Lee to have lunch with her. But before he can answer, she starts to apologize to him for not being there for him during the tragedy and for saying horrible things to him.
I should fucking burn in hell for what I said to you. It was just...
No, Randy, no.
As the conversation goes on, both Randy and Lee get extremely emotional and talk through tears. Lee refuses to accept Randy's apology, adamant that she has nothing to apologize for, emotionally declines her lunch request, and leaves.
Because
It's heart-wrenching to see that Lee, who has been fighting to keep his traumatic flashback at bay, loses the battle and breaks down in utter pain from the unspeakable tragedy. That evening, Lee goes to a bar, gets drunk, and gets in a meaningless fight with a stranger. Luckily, George breaks up the fight and takes him home. George takes Lee home and looks after him with his wife. Once he calms down, Lee thinks over everything and realizes that he can't handle living in the city anymore. He then talks to George and his wife, convinces them to adopt Patrick, and transfers all the guardianship money to them so that they can look after Patrick. He then informs his decision to Patrick and explains that he can rent out the boat and the house while living with his new parents, but can only make major financial decisions after he turns 21. Then, seeing Patrick being emotional, Lee explains that he can't stay in the city because he can't beat his trauma.
I set it up this way so you could stay here, and they're really glad to have you.
I know. I mean, they're great.
In the next few days, Lee returns to Boston, gets a job, searches for an apartment big enough to host Patrick should he visit, and resumes life. One day in spring, Lee returns to Manchester to bury Joe in a small service, joined by close family and friends. That afternoon, Lee and Patrick go fishing on the boat and bond like they used to.